Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villere's Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villere's provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villere's Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters, as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. Tonight, we'll talk a lot about what's going on with the Saints, LSU, Pelicans. We hope to get to Tulane if we have time. And, of course, we have a great guest list, as always. Les East and David Grubb of CrescentCitySports.com both join me on the program tonight. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. I'd like you to now to kind of let the folks know a little bit about what's going on. Happy New Year to both of you. And, of course, Les, you're involved in a lot of stuff. Tell us a little bit about how folks can find all your great writing.
Thanks, Eric. Happy New Year to you, too. As you mentioned, CrescentCitySports.com, right there regularly, as does my colleague here. And I write about LSU for SaturdayDownSouth.com. Been covering the Saints and the Pelicans for the New Iberia newspaper, doing some work for The Advocate, and covering some high schools for VarsitySportsNow.com. So staying busy.
Always staying busy. David, welcome back. Always good to have you. Tell us a little about CrescentCitySports.com. You dabbled in a little radio recently. Did a really good job.
Yeah, so I got to fill in last week for Dave DeCorbier over on Sports 1280, your station. So following you up. So I hope I did all right.
Did a great job. Did a great job.
And also I do a weekly spot with KYOK out of Houston every Thursday from 12:20 to 1 p.m. And, of course, writing about the Pelicans and LSU football for Crescent City Sports, and appearing regularly on the Bird Calls for the Bird Rights with SB Nation.
Yep, no doubt about it. And, of course, always on the radio show as well. Does a great job. You can hear him all over. Guys, welcome back to the show. As always, Saints 13-3, first round bye. They'll play Sunday the 13th in the Dome, 3:40 game. That'll be the last game of the weekend. They'll play either Dallas, Seattle, or Philly, the lowest seed, because they are the #1 seed. They have the bye week, as I mentioned. So before we get into what's in front of the Saints, let's look at the season in review. And a lot of people thought they were going to be really good. Didn't look like that way in the first 2 weeks of the season, that's for sure. But slowly but surely, they turned into the team that I think a lot of people thought they would be. Again, #1 seed. And a lot of people think have a really good chance of going to the Super Bowl this season. Les, I'll take you first. Your thoughts on the season?
Well, I think you have to say that they're the team to beat in the NFC. I don't think there's any question about that. Most of us, if not all of us, expected that they would be in the playoffs, probably as division champs. I don't know if a lot of people envisioned 13-3 and really 12-3 before they rested a lot of key players.
Right.
Could have easily been a 14-win season, which would have been the best ever. So probably exceeded my expectations, and I thought they were going to be really good. It all came together. I think the biggest thing that contributed to them being the #1 seed and better than I expected was that the defense got even better than I expected. They were pretty good last year. It looked like they were getting better. Going into this season, I think Demario Davis was one of the best free agent acquisitions in years. Made a huge difference. Sheldon Rankins raised his game a couple of notches. A lot of depth on that defense, the trade for Eli Apple. I just think the defense got so much better that elevated them to where they are now, where they're the team everybody else is shooting for in the NFC.
You know, Les, what's interesting is when we were looking at this team in the preseason, even at the end of last year, as well as the secondary played, you would have thought the strength of the defense would have been the secondary. It turned out the strength of the defense, obviously, is the front seven. The secondary, again, before they got Eli Apple, was incredibly leaky. Now, again, you just hope that you don't have to see the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers the rest of the way. But again, it's kind of a change, a sea change there, because a lot was expected out of that secondary coming into the season.
Yeah, and at times they've played very well, and at times they've played rather poorly. And it looked like late in the season they were getting better. Marshawn Lattimore, I don't think, has played as well as he did as a rookie, though at times he has played well. Eli Apple has been kind of the same way, hot and cold. The safeties have been pretty solid. Von
Bell had a great year.
Von Bell probably improved as much as anyone on that defense, absolutely. But the defensive line is really the story. You mentioned that. And you talk to other players on the team. I asked A.J. Klein a few weeks ago what the strength of the defense was. And, without hesitation, he says the defensive line. I mean, the linebackers and the secondary recognize how good that line is. Everything starts there, the pass rush, the run defense, along with Demario Davis, and the depth on that defensive line. That's really been the key to the improvement they've made.
David, your thoughts on season in review for the Saints?
Well, like you said, with the defensive line, that's really reminiscent of the Super Bowl team, is that they had the ability to switch guys in and out, keep that line fresh, and be able to attack the passer and stuff the run. That was what they were exceptional at when they won the Super Bowl in 2010. So I think the team is built that way again, to be able to rush the passer, though this team is clearly less reliant on turnovers as a defense to stay in a game. I think the best thing that the Saints did is they figured out the formula that you have to have when you have an older quarterback who's making $20+ million. Your defense better be cheap and good, and this one is, relatively speaking. It's cheap and good. And then your offense has to be able to do two things. Can you get first downs? And with Alvin Kamara and Mike Thomas, they can always move the chains. And so that keeps Drew on the field. He doesn't have to throw long passes. They don't have to have quick strikes. They can get them, but they don't have to have them. They can sustain a drive, keep the defense off the field when they need to. That's something that they had not been able to do in years past. It was a shootout most nights in the Superdome. Now they're able to get big offensive plays because they have the weapons, not out of necessity. And I think getting Ted Ginn, having him back late in the season, now that he says he's 100% and ready to go, having that second threat, the team seems versatile enough. If you can get some plays out of the tight end over the course of the playoffs, because there are going to be teams that take away something, but this team seems diversified enough and has built itself around what you have to have when you have an older quarterback to be ready to travel if you needed to. And unfortunately, they don't, because as we know, in the NFL, since the San Francisco 49ers played the Baltimore Ravens, and both of them were not #1 seeds, every #1 seed has made it to the Super Bowl in both conferences.
Guys, as we fast forward now to as the season has ended, and now again taking that bye week, maybe a little bit of concern now with this offensive line. Offensive line has been, I think, the key to the offense, the ability, again, to open up holes for the running backs, but also to give Drew Brees the opportunity to kind of go through his progressions with a young receiving core. We saw a leaky offensive line with, again, a lot of the shifting of positions, new guys coming in, guys coming off the street last week, having to play. The hope is with this week, but with, again, this bye week and a little bit of time between playoff game and the end of the regular season, that we'll see these guys get healthy. They've got to be healthy for the second season.
Yeah, and that's the biggest question facing this team going into the playoffs is the offense struggled over the last month of the season. I think that's primarily, not exclusively, but primarily because of the injuries on the offensive line, most notably Charan Armstead. I think this time off, as well as not playing everybody last week, gives them a good chance to get everybody back. If they have their line intact, and I think Larry Warford will probably be ready, probably Pete, and I think there's a pretty good chance Armstead will be ready. So if they have those 5 guys intact and they're able to stay on the field and not get knocked out during the game, then that, I think, pretty much eliminates concern number one about this team. If the offensive line is healthy and plays the way it did during that 10-game winning streak, it's going to be awful hard for any team to keep up with them in the Dome.
Your thoughts on the line, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. They have to stay upright. I mean, it's going to be a grind, but again, playing at home, that's a big benefit. You know, your counts are stabilized. Right. Guys are able to communicate across that line. I think that familiarity is important. And then, like you said, having this time off is critical for them. They're going to do everything, obviously, to make sure that those guys are healthy. But the ability to run the football is also so important for a line that they're not having to drop back into pass protection 40 times, which is much harder on linemen than it is to go forward and run block.
Yes.
So they don't have to drop back and do that. So I think that that's a benefit as well this season.
Yeah, and again, you'd like to keep Pete at guard, not have to move him out to tackle if you don't have to. Will Clapp did a nice job, but again, the more that again they get a little film on Will Clapp, they're going to expose him. You know, again, hopefully this line is intact going into the playoffs. And Armstead's a big question mark. I mean,
he has to make it through a game.
Right. Right,
Yeah.
I mean, he's got to. I mean, again, and look, if he can play, he's going to play. It's the second season. You mentioned Ted Ginn Jr., him coming back, what it meant to the offense. Got some young wide receivers that are still trying to find their way. I mean, at times, got fans pulling their hair out, and I'm sure Brees has been patient with him, but he's got to be thinking the same thing. We don't never let anybody know about it. What a dynamic he brings to this team, and you know, going back to his time at Carolina to now. That's not a guy that scared you a lot. You know, now you look at him here in New Orleans. Again, he's involved in more of the route tree, doing a little bit different things than he maybe did at Carolina. But he is going to be a huge re-addition for this team in the playoffs if they're going to be able to move the ball through the air.
I mean, you go back to Week 16. I mean, that's what veterans do. When you have to get a first down, he knew where to be. He made the catch right after a rookie drops the ball. I mean, that's what vets do. You come back and you make those catches, and they needed somebody other than Mike Thomas that defenses have to respect, both over the top and across, because you can't continue to just send Mike Thomas and be the guy to take those hits. They need somebody else who can you know, create favorable matchups, and especially when you bring Kamara out of the backfield, you've got Thomas on one side, and you can send Ginn over the top. It's really hard for a defense to prioritize who they want to stop because each one of those guys can make a big play in a different way.
Yeah. Ginn has obviously been is going to be big going into the postseason. How big, considering, again, what we saw last week with Michael Thomas trying to get the Joe Horn's record and how hard it was with teams, again, trying to take him out. They'll try to do the same thing in the playoffs to a different degree because it's a much more physical play in the playoffs. That's the one thing that concerns me about the young receivers. Not getting separation, not catching the ball cleanly, not coming back to the ball for Brees during the regular season. It's going to get much tougher as you get into the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a big factor going forward. We've been talking about this since July, the fact that they didn't have a lot of depth at wide receiver, and then when Ginn went out with the injury, it really exposed the fact that they only had one dependable receiver, an outstanding receiver, but only one who was dependable in Michael Thomas. And Ginn doesn't necessarily have to make a lot of catches. He made some big ones against the Steelers, and that's great. But just the threat of having him out there forces the defenses to respect him and gives Brees some more operating room when they send guys out in patterns. So just his presence is important, and then plays he makes, of course, are important as well. There are so many factors with the receivers. They have to run precise routes. They have to get open. You mentioned they have to come back for the ball. But we've seen at times late in the season where there have been coverage sacks or coverage pressure on Brees because the line wasn't fully intact and because those young receivers weren't getting open. And if they're not 100% on the offensive line and those guys don't get open, it's going to make things so much more difficult for Drew Brees, and he's going to have less time to operate with the pass rush. So those guys have to get open, and having Ted Ginn in that group makes a big difference. I'm not sure if he's going to be 100%, but if he's able to play like he did against the Steelers, that makes a big difference.
Hindsight being 2020, Willie Snead would really be helpful right now for this team. They need that type of player. The tight ends have not played as well as expected. You know, Ben Watson, if he could emerge, or Hill in the playoffs, that would be huge. You know, somebody up that can go up the seam for him. It's been a problem.
That has been a position of need.
No, it
I mean,
has.
we're talking ever since you know the trade. So you're looking at something where they just don't have a lot of athleticism at the position. They don't have guys who can get downfield, and we know now the NFL is much more where your tight end is more similar to an H-back than a tight end most downs. And they just haven't been able to get that. And that's something that Brees has relied on through most of his career, is having an effective tight end.
Yeah.
So it's a loss for the offense. The good thing is when you have a Ben Watson, I think when you get into the playoffs, you end up with plays that aren't on the script. You know, coverage comes from places, blitzers come from different places. Ben Watson can make that read. Same with Ted Ginn. It's not about all the plays you make, it's the ones when you need them most. Right. And hopefully Watson can do those things. But yeah, you can't expect a tight end to have a game-breaking type of performance in this postseason.
They re-signed Josh Hill for next year, knowing that, again, they have no tight ends under contract for next season. Manui is a free agent. He's on injury reserve. Obviously, Watson has announced his retirement. What a great career he's had on and off the field. He's really got to emerge for this team, to me, in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think out of that group, he's probably the guy most likely to step up and make important plays in the playoffs. So I think Josh Hill is capable. I think he did it in the past in a playoff game. Was it the Detroit game or the Carolina game last year, maybe? So he's done it before, but Ben Watson would be the guy you would think, because he's played in so many big games over the years. This is it for him. You know, he knows that this is his last chance to get a ring, to be a contributor in significant games, and he's been a clutch player throughout his career. So he would be a guy you would keep an eye on, expecting that he could probably come up with some big plays. And if teams do give that added attention to Michael Thomas, which we think they're probably going to do, Ben Watson is the type of guy who can make some big plays. But we know Sean Payton and Drew Brees will give anybody a chance. You know, Dan Arnold is liable to find himself out there with an opportunity, because they will call anybody's number if that's what the defense is giving them, and it's a question of who's going to be able to make those plays when the opportunity comes, and I think Ben Watson is one of the more reliable options.
One thing that obviously they can do well is run the football less, and maybe they didn't run it as much as they should have at times, especially with having a back like Ingram back there, Kamara. I mean, to me, there were plenty of times during the season where I was saying, man, now's the time to really kind of run the rock, take some time off the clock, be a little bit more physical. You know, they did that back in 09. They were a physical running team in 09. They did it for a while this season. What do you expect out of the playoffs? Do you expect them to go back to the running game more?
Oh, I think we'll see that. It'll depend on matchups to some degree, but I think what you're going to see, you know, you win 2 home games, you're in the Super Bowl. Okay, so you're not thinking long term. Right. And I think Sean Payton is going to put Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara, and Michael Thomas. Those are going to be the guys. Yeah, somewhere along the line, somebody else is going to have to make a play. But I think more so than during the regular season game, Payton's going to say, okay, we're going to put Kamara out wide. We're going to have Ingram in the backfield. We're going to put Thomas out there. Y'all figure out how you're going to stop us. I mean, if you have a cannon, shoot it.
Right.
And so he's going to play, he's going to use all of those weapons together to maximum effect in these 2 games, presumably, to try and get to the Super Bowl. So yeah, they'll run the ball some, but I think you're going to see Alvin Kamara touch the ball a lot in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Your thoughts?
They're going to have to with the side of the bracket that they got. I mean, if you, whatever it is, Dallas, you're going to have to run the ball against Dallas. You're going to have to run the ball against Philly. You're going to have to run the ball against Seattle. So the opponents dictate that if you can't have balance, you're playing into their hands. These are teams that want you to be one-dimensional. So Sean Payton, I think the thing that we always want out of him is don't get too smart. You know, use your weapons. You always want Sean Payton to take full advantage of what he has, but he doesn't have to be cute. He doesn't have to do the things. You know, be daring, be himself, but run the football. Yeah, please get your 25, 30 attempts on the ground.
Any concerns about the defense?
The only concern about the defense, we talked about there have been some problems with the pass defense from time to time, but I would think the starting defense played terrible in that last game.
Yes.
They gave 24 points in the first 4 possessions.
How much do you put that on the fact guys not trying to get injured, maybe playing half speed, and as opposed to what we saw leading up to that game?
Well, I think if you look at their body of work over the season, that's an aberration. And I think the most likely explanation is that they didn't have the focus and the intensity that they'll have in the playoffs. So I'm not overly concerned that they didn't just forget how to play defense the way they did during that winning streak. So I think that's probably a big part of it. And I would expect them to come out and play well on the 13th. But nonetheless, if there is a concern about the defense, other than maybe giving up the occasional big play in the passing game, is the fact they did not play well in that last game. They didn't sit defensive starters the way they sat offensive starters. But I think more than likely the explanation is that it was not a playoff type of intensity from that group.
Any concerns on the defensive side of the ball for you?
Again, I think it comes with the matchups. You know, you have quarterbacks. You have 2 Super Bowl winners in Nick Foles and Russell Wilson, who you could be potentially facing, and then Dak Prescott is a mobile guy. And the Saints sometimes have had problems with mobile quarterbacks, whether it's Cam Newton or when Jameis Winston has gotten out of
You say
the
all
pocket.
3 of those guys are mobile.
Right. And so you have 3 mobile quarterbacks who could cause damage. And those are things that sometimes the Saints have had issues with, who can make plays downfield. If you can extend, you might be able to exploit some holes in the secondary. So, you know, the pass rush has to be effective. They have to be able to collapse the pocket.
You got to like the way Davenport's come on. Again, Okafor's playing well down the stretch here. You had mentioned Rankins, the way he's been playing, and of course Cam Jordan as well. I like the way the front four's playing, and of course the linebackers have been phenomenal all year long.
And then we should also mention David Onyemata on the defense.
No doubt.
He had those 3 sacks against the Cowboys. Played very well down the stretch. The front sevens played really well. I think they finally figured it out with the linebackers. You know, for these last 2 years, they had a lot of good guys and a lot of versatility, and they had some injuries last year. And now they've been healthier. You add DeMario Davis, and I think with Klein, Anzalone, and Davis, they've kind of figured out the best unit that they have out of all those people, and I think that's been a big compliment to the play they've had up front with the defensive
biggest difference for me, Les and David, is the speed of the linebackers. I mean, as I mentioned on this show, on the radio show, there was a time a couple of years ago where they're like plodding horses out there. You're looking at Atlanta, you're looking at Tampa Bay, you're looking at Carolina. These guys, the linebackers, are going sideline to sideline, and you're saying, where are the athletic linebackers for the Saints? All of a sudden, Anzalone comes around. He's having injury-free seasons thus far. And then, of course, DeMario Davis has been a tackling machine. It's allowed A.J. Klein to do what he does well. So, again, you've got some athleticism there as well.
It didn't match what the defensive line was before. And like you said, they weren't sideline-to-sideline guys, and you really hadn't had that since Jonathan Vilma, and DeMario Davis has been everywhere on the field this year.
Guys, MVP voting will be happening soon. A lot of people believe it's between Mahomes and Brees. Your thoughts?
Well, actually, I wrote about this a few days ago at CrescentCitySports.com. It's probably not real popular, but what I said was, in what is a very close competition, I think Patrick Mahomes is the most valuable player in the NFL this year. Drew Brees has had a great season. He's had an MVP caliber season, but the Saints are less dependent on him this year than any other time during his career because they have the running game. They have the best defense they've had under Sean Payton. They have outstanding special teams. Drew Brees has been great, but he hasn't had to be as good as he was in the past. Mahomes has flashier stats. Brees has more efficient stats. But to me, what it comes down to, what separates the two, is Kansas City has a bad defense. They cut the leading rusher in the NFL last year, who was on his way to well over 1,000 yards this year. They took away a big part of Mahomes' running game, and he's got a bad defense. I think he's had to do more. He's had to be more valuable to his team by a small amount compared to Brees, and that's why I'd make Mahomes the MVP.
I think that's the way it ends, too. It's just, It's tough. I mean, MVP awards are always a difficult thing, but you look at the history of the league, and a lot of people who should have them just don't have them.
Yeah, Brees left. There's a couple on Brees that should be on Brees' mantelpiece right now. They're not there.
Yeah. So I mean, but if you're Drew Brees, again, you know, the ultimate prize is winning the championship. And Peyton Manning's got a slew of MVP awards. I'm sure he'd trade in a few of those for another ring, and Brett Favre as well. So if Drew Brees can get the second one, I think that's more than enough that he needs to put him in the conversation of greatest quarterbacks of all time.
Guys, speaking of Brees, been a narrative lately, especially over the last few weeks. Saints win the Super Bowl, Brees goes out on top, he retires. I am one that says, no, Drew, stick around as long as you can play at a high level. But there are some that believe that, again, he may walk away. I'm not in the locker room every week. Les, you are. Your thoughts?
I don't see it.
I don't either.
I mean, I understand the rationale for it. You know, he'll never have a better circumstance from which to walk away from the game. But he's an extremely competitive guy who loves playing football, who loves winning, who loves setting records. And there's nothing wrong with that. And he's still good. He's still really good. He's 39 years old. He's going to be 40 in a couple of days if he's not already. And we're talking about him being MVP or narrowly missing out on being MVP. So there's a lot more that he can do individually and with this team. This is a relatively young team.
Yes.
I just don't see it. I just think there's so much more still out there for him and this team. I just think if they win it this year, he'd say, great, let's go get number 3 next year.
I agree with you. And again, that's what I talked about today on the radio show. I don't understand where this narrative is coming from, because he looks at this team and he's got to say, man, we have just scratched the surface based on again, the youth of this team, how much better they can be down the line here. And he's been fairly injury-free, and he's still playing at a very, very high level. I don't see him walking away. Dave, do you?
No, I mean, look at the situations of the people who walked away on top. Let's say John Elway was physically broken down by the time they won that, and that was a team being carried by its running game predominantly. When Peyton Manning left, his arm was shot. He was struggling to complete 10-yard outs, you know, in that last Super Bowl. That he clearly was not the best player on his offense. And even a Brett Favre, his last year in Minnesota after the 2009 season, he just wasn't. It was a shell of himself. Drew is in great physical shape. Again, Tom Brady, you look at him and he's into his 40s and is still playing at a high level. But you put Drew in the dome, you give him that, you give him another year if they bring back Ingram. You have Ingram, Kamara maintained as a group, Thomas continuing to grow. You don't have to be reliant on him to have 5,000-yard seasons and throw 40 touchdowns. I don't see an incentive as long as that defense can be maintained or improved.
Yes.
Why leave?
Right.
If you're physically healthy and you don't have any issues and you want to play, play.
Your thoughts on Teddy Bridgewater? How he played on Sunday, what his future is?
It's tough. I mean, he wasn't put in a situation where he was going to flourish on Sunday, so it's hard to make a read.
Offensive line.
You know the coaching staff likes him. It's going to be what options are out there for Teddy, and there certainly will be, because we know the quarterbacking market every year is just a complete, just a question mark as you go into each offseason, depending on coaching changes. But I think the Saints are high on Teddy. They'd like him to come back, but price is always the biggest concern.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the Saints would like to have him back. I just think it's unlikely that what they are able to pay him, presumably to continue to be Drew's backup, is going to be anywhere close to what he can get on the open market. I don't know, what is it, 8 or 10 coaching changes now? I lost count of them. Almost every one of those coaches is going to be looking to see if he can upgrade the quarterback position, unless they have a really good quarterback in place, which if they did, they probably wouldn't have a new coach.
True.
And guys are going to be looking around, and Teddy Bridgewater is going to be one of the guys that these new coaches are going to look at and say, there's a free agent I can get that I can start rebuilding with. And so I just think somebody's going to make him an offer that the Saints can't afford to match.
I would agree. Again, he's going to have a chance to start. He hasn't played in forever. I mean, it'd be nice to say you can sit behind Brees for 2 years. But what happens if it's 3 years? What happens if it's 4 years? Again, and you're not a backup. He's not a backup quarterback. He's a great insurance policy. I understand why they did it. They're going to get the compensatory pick back. Okay, if they lose him, so again, it really was a win-win situation for the Saints. And from what I understand in the locker room, he's been a great addition to the locker room as well. And we wish him the best. And hopefully he doesn't have to play from this point forward, because that means Drew Brees is playing well. Dave, I'll ask you first. Dallas, Seattle, Philadelphia, best matchup for the Saints.
I'd have to say probably Philadelphia. I would pick Philadelphia out of the three, just because Dallas does things well that the Saints, don't want to deal with. They're very stout up front. That's a big test for that offensive line. Seattle is just a team that I'm very nervous about. Outside of Chicago, they were one of the teams that I thought could get hot. And I think Seattle's that kind of team. So I think Philadelphia is a wounded animal, still a very good team, but I don't think they're as good as they were last year. I think they're wounded. I think they can be beaten.
Same question.
I would say Dallas, and I agree with you that it's not a great matchup for the Saints. But out of the three, I think it's the best for a couple of reasons. One, it wasn't that long ago the Saints went into Dallas and did not play well and got beat. I think psychologically, emotionally, even though it's a playoff game, I think the Saints have a bit of an edge there. If I'm Dallas, I'm not crazy about trying to scheme a way to beat this team a second time in their building. So I think that helps the Saints. Eagles won a Super Bowl 11 months ago, and there's a lot to be said for that. They had to win a couple of Super Bowls on their way to get into the playoffs.
True. Oh, yeah.
That's a team with a lot of heart and courage.
A different team with Nick Foles behind center, too.
Yeah, absolutely. They're on a roll. Seattle's, for the most part, they had a hiccup there against San Francisco. For the most part, they've played well down the stretch. Pete Carroll's a good coach. Russell Wilson's a good quarterback. I don't think Dak Prescott in a playoff game is as good a player as Russell Wilson and Nick Foles. And I think the fact that the Saints laid an egg when they went to Dallas a few weeks ago, I think all of that kind of makes Dallas the better or the best of those three potential matchups.
Final question. How far can the Saints team go?
They should go to the Super Bowl.
Will they win it?
Yeah, they should. They should go to the Super Bowl, and they should win it.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I don't think there's a team in the AFC that's their equal. If anybody would beat them, it would have to be in the NFC, and that's a hard thing to do in the Dome.
I agree with both of you guys. We'll take a break. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Tonight, Les East and David Grubb of CrestlySports.com are our guests. We'll come back. We'll talk some LSU football. We'll get into some Pelicans basketball, and, of course, your phone calls. Stick around.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guests tonight, Les East and David Grubb of CrestlySports.com. We talk LSU football now. 10-3 Fiesta Bowl champions, 40-32 over University of Central Florida. And guys, much like we did for the Saints, Les, I ask you, let's look back at the LSU season. A season that, I got to be honest, a lot of people didn't think that they could win 10 games. I'm one of them. Again, the addition of Burrow, the addition of Tracy. Again, for most Tiger fans, you got to believe this was a pretty magical season, considering what was forecast for this team in the preseason.
It was a very good season. You had a lot of people talking about 6 wins before this season started. Now, you go back and look at it, Miami wasn't quite the team that we thought they might be.
True.
Auburn wasn't quite the team. So that schedule, even Georgia wasn't quite the team. So that schedule maybe wasn't quite as difficult as we thought it was going to be. Nonetheless, 10 times they were this close to beating Texas A&M, and they would have been at a sole possession of second place in the West and 11 wins if they win that game at College Station. Even without it, 10 wins against that schedule, to have all those injuries on defense, all those people missing, not just because of injuries, play with basically half your defense, and beat a team that had won 25 games in a row and had all the incentive in the world to treat that like a championship game, to go and beat them and finish with 10 wins with a narrow loss on the road to Florida and then losing to Alabama like everybody else does. I think it's an outstanding season. I think, people are always looking for a reason to talk about Ed Orgeron not being able to do the job. Maybe finishing on a high note somewhere along the way in the offseason, people might take a step back and actually think, maybe this guy knows what he's doing.
Well, look, big change in the narrative, right, Dave?
Yes.
I mean, last year you lose to Notre Dame, you got guys sitting on the sidelines, then you have the defections, you have the arrest, you have all this turmoil, you lose Patrick Surtain, who was supposed to be coming to LSU. The class is not as good as it was forecast to be. This thing's on a downward spiral. He kept it together, okay? He kept it together. So that's a big plus, and the whole narrative changed now. This is what we thought it would be last year.
Right.
With that said, your thoughts on the season?
Yeah, I think this could be the season that people look back and say this became Ed Orgeron's program. Because
That's a great point.
Getting that 10th win was critical for him. It didn't matter who it came against. It's great that it came against Central Florida and 25 straight wins and all of that. But he needed to get that 10, because you get an 8 and a 9 and people say, well, we were already doing that with less. You get the 10 you're building. Now you have the 4th ranked class for 2019, the 2nd ranked class for 2020. You have that momentum going forward. And really the same problem that you've been dealing with before Ed Orgeron got there is the one you're dealing with, but it's the only one you have to focus on. How do we make our offense more explosive? And that becomes the question. It's not, can Orgeron coach? Because now I think most people are on board and saying he can coach.
Right.
He's not being out-coached. He's not being embarrassed on the sidelines. Right. So you give him the benefit of the doubt there. You know he can recruit. Absolutely. So the next thing is, can he adjust, get a quarterback, make the offense explosive, because that's the key that unlocks the playoffs. Well, if you don't have an explosive offense, you don't make the playoffs.
Stay with that. Is Ensminger the answer there? Well, was it not having enough tools in the tool chest? Young players that again, at the wide receiver position, not having that bell cow running back, so to speak. Was that the problem? Was it the scheme?
I think all three of those were dependent on each other.
Right.
I think Ensminger said he wanted to do more with the playbook, but you saw they had to keep tight ends in because of the instability on the offensive line due to injury and just inconsistency. The receivers were young, and you didn't have a truly elite running back. You had guys who were workhorses, guys who could do the job in Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Nick Brissett. They did an outstanding job for what they are, which is very good college running backs. But neither one of them will be guys who are featured on Sundays. When you get a guy, if they get next year, they're supposed to have all of those in place. And with Burrow being in his 2nd year in the system, hopefully you take that leap. But I don't think it's on Ensminger. I think people need to let him go a little bit as a focus and say, let's see if we've got the consistency up front. If we've got that and we've got a quarterback 2 years in a row, can we start to develop something? I still don't think Joe Burrow is the guy at quarterback. But if you get 2nd year in the system and your talent is improved, he could be good enough to get you to where you want to go.
Talk about Ensminger, because again, one of the criticisms is what's the identity of this offense? Because I don't know if we saw the identity of the offense. We were told it was going to be a spread. Orgeron just said recently in his season-ended press conference that he wants to run a spread offense. Didn't see a lot of that this year.
No, we didn't, and I don't think you can say the problem is the scheme or Ensminger. Now, down the road, we may discover that is a problem.
Okay.
But I think the limitations were caused by the things David talked about.
Especially the offensive line,
The offensive line, for a variety of reasons, was not very good or inconsistent at least. They did have some moments. Didn't have the outstanding running back. The two guys did, Brissett and Edwards-Helaire, both did good jobs for the ability that they have. The wide receivers were by far the most disappointing position group on the team. Now, we saw Jamar Chase emerge in the Fiesta Bowl. Justin Jefferson had a nice season. There's a lot of talent there. They may still be a good group, but they weren't what they were touted to be going into this season. So you throw all that together, and the fact that the quarterback was a nice player but not a great player, I think they did reasonably well on offense. Ensminger did with what he had to work with. So I think you got to get a stronger, deeper, more dependable offensive line and more consistent playmakers around them, and see what Ensminger does with that before you can judge him. So I'm reserving judgment on Ensminger at this point because I think he did reasonably well with his hands tied.
Based on what you saw this year, what's coming in terms of the freshman class, can this offensive line be upgraded?
Well, it can be. It's hard to say. You know, you hear about recruits. I don't know if these 18-year-old kids are going to come in and be able to block in the SEC.
Right.
So I don't know if you can expect there to be a big difference on the offensive line. Now, they have some younger players who have been playing who you would expect to develop.
Be better, right.
And that some of the guys they played this year who will be back, they're going to lose Garrett Brumfield. That's going to hurt them, losing him. You know, you hope that Sadiq Charles bounces back. He had sort of a rough season. So, yeah.
If Damian Lewis stays.
Right.
Yeah. You know, there were a lot of question marks there. So, yeah, potentially it can get better, but I don't think anybody's going to know till September.
Right. What are your thoughts? Again, you watch recruiting closely. There's some really good recruits coming in. The question is, can they assimilate very quickly into the SEC?
I mean, they've only brought in 4 linemen, and I don't think that they're satisfied with the group that they've gotten. I mean, I think they have a couple of 4-stars in there, but they're not elite. And you know, the reason that Bama is what Bama is that their line on both sides is always strong.
Yes.
And so we know in football it starts up front.
And it was up with like that when Saban was here as well.
Exactly. He built that LSU offensive line and into one of the best, was consistently sending guys to the NFL.
Sure.
And you haven't seen that the last couple of years out of the LSU offensive linemen. So, yeah, it's hard to guess in December because, again, they are high school kids. And until they step foot on campus, either the early group that comes in or after summer camp, and you start to see what they physically look like and they start to really hit people, no, you won't know. But it all comes down to the Alabama game anyway. We know that. Every season will be judged on how they do against Alabama. So we'll see then.
Based on the group they have now, can they be better?
They can be better, absolutely. I believe they can be better because we've seen them at their best. Like when they played against Georgia and they did everything that they were supposed to do. They're not that much better than Georgia, but they were able to compete at an extremely high level. So the difference between them, again, is just going to be, can they at least keep the rush off of Joe Burrow? Because what we saw all season was Joe Burrow, in a lot of occasions, running for his life when he was in passing situations, not even getting an opportunity to read. There are things he can do better as well, but you got to give him at least 3 seconds of clean time to throw the football.
And he had no time against Alabama at all.
No
doubt about it. How about the defensive side of the ball? Look back on this past season and the future of this group as well.
Well, I think as long as Dave Aranda's the coordinator, they got a pretty good future.
You think he's got a chance? You think he's going to be flirting with the NFL? There's been some talk that maybe here or there.
I think that's always going to be a concern that he's going to want to go to the NFL. He's certainly going to get opportunities.
Yes.
I mean, he's obviously an outstanding coach. So he's going to have opportunities, and I don't know how long he's going to want to be a defensive coordinator in the SEC when there are so many other challenges out there for him. But as long as he's there, they're going to get maximum productivity out of the talent they have. I think the defensive line did not live up to the expectations that a lot of people had, because I think a lot of people thought this was going to be one of the best defensive lines maybe ever.
Right.
And they had some injuries, and they didn't have a lot of depth there, and so there were a lot of reasons for it. But they still, for the most part, played really well on defense. They got a lot of young guys. They were a young defense this year. They're going to be young again next year. Greedy Williams leaving early, Ed Alexander on the line leaving early. So, there's a lot of transition there. But they're in a situation now where the LSU defense is always going to have talent. And if Aranda is coaching that talent, they're always going to be very good on defense. But they got to keep some of these guys around for 2 or 3 years and have the depth necessary to be elite if they're going to be a CFP contender.
Your thoughts on defense?
It is with the defensive line. They've got to be better at the pass rush because with the secondary that they're able to recruit year in and year out. And again, they're going to have the #1 corner in the country coming in this fall in Stingley. And that, they're always going to be able to cover on the outside.
Right.
But if they can get that pass rush, again, the key to beating Alabama, no one got two off his spot. If you can't get the quarterback off his spot, you're not going to win big games. And LSU has not. Arden Key, his last season, he was out of shape for most of his junior year before he left. And this season, they didn't really have an elite pass rusher. And Devin White covered up for a lot of youthful mistakes because he was so instinctive as a linebacker. So that's leadership you have to replace as well as talent. That's always hard, but LSU seems to have consistent reserves of that on the defensive end. Again, with Aranda being, he's not even 40 yet, and he's making $3.5 million a year as a coordinator in the SEC. There will be options. So hopefully Orgeron, being a defensive guy, is also grooming the next Dave Aranda on that staff, or has his eye on somebody. Because I don't think Aranda's long for Baton Rouge, just because of his skill set.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see again how long he'll stay. Let's head to the phone line. Greg is in Houma. Greg, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Greg.
Hey guys, got a question. What was the logic of playing Mark Ingram so long when they had Dwayne Washington? And I don't know what was the logic behind that. Maybe you can help me out.
Guys, he didn't play that long. But he did play some. Washington took over really in the second half. But
yeah, he
was trying to get a. They were hoping. He had a chance. They've been trying to get him that record for a while now. Unfortunately, he couldn't get it. I think the bigger question is, will he be back next season?
Well, yeah, I think that's the bigger question. I don't know if he's going to be back. They would like to have him back. I'm sure he would like to be in that offense. But is his value on the open market and his value to the Saints, do those two meet or not? I don't know if they're going to meet.
Right. This is his last contract. So, do you go for the money, or do you stay where you're at and maybe have a chance to win another Super Bowl, or win multiple Super Bowls?
And how do they negotiate with him?
Right.
Because if their priorities are, we've identified these offensive linemen that we want to go after, or there's a second receiver we need to go after.
Yes.
How much pool of how much assets are there for him?
Right.
So it depends on how quickly there's a quick negotiation. He knows he wants to be here and it's done very quickly. But if it lingers on and that basket gets smaller, then he has to look at other options.
And remind me, guys, they didn't pick up his fifth-year option, did they? He had a chance to get his fifth-year option picked up. They didn't pick it up. They ended up renegotiating a contract with him, so he lost big money there. So, the question is, again, is it about, Kamara and the team and being in this environment, or is it about me being the bell cow somewhere and getting paid one last time?
Well, and I think that probably comes down to exactly what the dollar figures are. I think, Sean Payton traded up to pick Mark Ingram. He stuck with Mark Ingram when he was a bust early in his career. He was suspended for 4 games this year, and the Saints welcomed him back with open arms. I think there's a lot of bonds there between the Saints and Mark Ingram, and I think all other things being equal, they would like to keep that partnership going, and I think there might be a hometown discount there, but there's a ceiling on that hometown discount.
Yeah. And any thoughts on why he was playing? The question for the caller.
Well, I think again, to get him the record, and then also he hadn't had a lot of carries because he had missed those
the first 4 games.
And then there were games where he just didn't get a lot of carries. So give him the opportunity. You want him to have some contact before he takes essentially 2 weeks off.
And I think they wanted to have some sort of continuity on the offense. They didn't have their linemen. They didn't have Drew.
Right.
If they don't put Ingram out there, I don't think they wanted it to just be a total disaster.
Let people tee off on Bridgewater.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think you want to have some sort of momentum from whoever's out there playing. And I think they needed to have a stabilizing force on the offense, at least for part of the game.
Both these gentlemen cover the New Orleans Pelicans. We'll go to them next, 17-22 at this time of this show. Guys, just to sum it up in a nutshell, that they don't do the little things to win. They don't play defense. It's something they did very well last year. They're not making the hustle plays that they made last year. And again, it's showing. Now, again, you can blame injuries, you can blame lack of depth, you can blame all that. But to me, if they went out and they played with intensity night after night, they played defense, hit the boards, they'd win more than they lose. They just have not done that at this point. Dave, I'll take you first. Your thoughts on the state of the Pelicans?
The state of the Pelicans is, I guess, I would say, one of my favorite players from the 1980s was Michael Ray Richardson. And he was asked famously about how the Knicks were doing, and he said, "This ship be sinking."
Right.
And I think the ship is sinking. Does that mean that that the season is over? Yes, I would say yes, it is. They have to win essentially 31. They have to win 31 games the rest of the way to match what they did last season, which means they're going to have to win at almost a 70% clip. There are 6 teams between them and the 8th spot in the playoffs. And people say it's not a lot of games, but 6 teams is more than the games, because that means all those people have to drop back to you, which is highly unlikely that all 6 of those would do that, just to make the 8th spot.
Right.
And then you put on that the impending free agent status of Nico Mirotic, Julius Randle, Elfrid Payton, Jahlil Okafor. I mean, literally this whole team outside of Eastwan Moore, Drew Holiday, and Solomon Hill is a free agent, because even we're thinking about Anthony Davis too being traded this offseason. This is the fall of Rome. I mean, it's crumbling around them. At best, even if they rebounded somehow and made the playoffs, would you expect them to get out of the first round? No, you wouldn't. So what this season now is just watching to see how it plays out. How do we get to the summer, and what do we do from there? But the regular season, it's a fait accompli.
Let's, before I go to you, how did they get to this point?
It's organization deep. It starts from ownership all the way down. I mean, Tom Haberstroh for NBC Sports wrote an article today about how the organization had failed Anthony Davis. The impression around the league is that the Benson family has not prioritized the Pelicans. They're the only team in the NBA that shares facilities with the football team. The other 2 teams that do it, Paul Allen, who owned both the Seahawks and the Portland Trailblazers, 2 separate organizations run by separate people at the top. And then when you look at the Crankies, who own the Rams and the Denver Nuggets, 2 separate organizations with basketball people into the basketball, football with football. Mickey Loomis is the head of both for the Pelicans and the Saints. It has not worked. You have the health situation. The Pelicans have been more injured than any other team since Anthony Davis has been playing in New Orleans. The medical staff has come into question not only from Pelicans players. Eric Gordon complained on the way out. Tyreek Evans complained on the way out. Chris Paul complained when he was here. So teams have been doing it, and players can tell. I mean, Drew Holiday's misdiagnosis, a lot of things. You look at Nico Mirotic's lingering ankle injury. Why has it lingered so long? Why was Elfrid Payton so long with the finger? It felt like it was longer than it needed to be. So those things are concerns. And then just the play of the players themselves. They don't seem committed to each other. They talk a lot about, the Pelicans say this every night, and you hear it. We got to play for each other. We got to play for each other. You don't see that on either end of the court. Guys know what they can get offensively, and they know what they're not going to do defensively. And that's what the leaders do. And then the rest of the guys try to fall in some way behind them.
Your thoughts on the state of the Pelicans?
I think they're soft. The thing that I'm going to always take from this season, unless something turns around, is that game in Boston.
Yes.
A few weeks ago, Celtics were missing, I think, 3 starters.
Yes.
5 players total.
5 rotation players.
And they came out, and it's like, we're the Boston Celtics. And we're going to go out, and we're going to play like the Boston Celtics. And at that point, Mirotic wasn't out. Payton might have been out, but the Pelicans, they were healthier than they've been for a lot of this season. And they came out, and it was kind of like, okay, we're here. We got to play 48 minutes. We're going to play 48 minutes. We probably win because this team doesn't have any of the players. And the Celtics came out and played like it was a playoff game, and the Pelicans went out and they played. They didn't play like it was a playoff game, and the Celtics beat them. They beat them decisively with less talent. And I think you see that far too often, where they're just, okay, it's November, it's December, we got 82 of these things, this is one of them. I just think they're soft. And I think, you can talk about the organization and all this other stuff, and that's all factored into it. But Anthony Davis is a really, really good player, but he's not an elite player with the heart of a champion.
Your thoughts on his comments?
I mean, this is a team that's been devoid of leadership, for years.
Yes.
And I would say, people talk about AD needs help, and people run that article. We've seen it 1,000 times.
Sure.
Give me the last team that Chris Paul was on. The last team that he was here, that he dragged to 48 wins and to a 6-game loss to the Lakers in the first round of the playoffs. that team wasn't as talented as this team is right now.
True.
Chris Paul's ceiling, and Chris Paul will go down as one of the great point guards of his time, maybe one of the top 3 or 4 of all time, is not as high as Anthony Davis's. But Chris Paul would cut his own leg off for a win.
Right.
He was dying on the bench
And he
in Game 7 in Houston. And for whatever people think of him, and yes, he can be a jerk, but that's what you need in your locker room. Every team needs one of those guys. And we can talk about Rondo and what he meant and his leadership. It wasn't on the court with Rondo.
No,
it had nothing to do with on the court.
Room.
He ran that locker room.
Yep.
You knew it. There was a feeling when you were inside. He was the one calling guys at 2 in the morning and saying, this is what we need to do better in next game. I saw you not doing this. This is what I didn't do. No one's doing that in that locker room now. Like you said, when Drew Holiday, who, again, has worked his behind off and is one of the top guards in the NBA, but he constantly says, we've got time to turn this around. And there's no time.
There's no time.
There's no time.
No, there is no time. What happens next, Les?
Well, that's a good question. Think about this from Anthony Davis's perspective. And man, I was just critical of him a minute ago, but he's still an extremely talented player who anybody in the NBA would love to have and will make offers to get. If he's sitting here and he's like anybody else, he wants to win a championship. He wants to win a lot of championships before his career is over. If you're him and you're looking at this situation and you know anybody else in the NBA will do what's reasonable to get him on their team, are you going to look at this situation and say, that's the place where I can get everything I want to get out of my career? I think he's got to say no.
Right.
And it's eventually, in the not too distant future, it's going to become clear that he realizes he can't get to where he wants to be here, and the Pelicans are going to have to cut their losses.
Do you think we'll see the same team in the second half of the season on the court that we're seeing today?
Well, I'd say this. You have 2 basic options. Number one is they can try and do one more Hail Mary.
Right.
And give up more, give up another first-round draft pick, try to swing, maybe trade Nico because that's the only guy you have really as an expiring who could bring you something in return, and try to bring in a superstar. That superstar's not available. There's nobody out there that that a team in contention or team out of contention can give you to make that difference. But they could try it and do it for PR purposes. Or they can just ride the sucker out and get all these guys off of the salary, off their cap sheets, trade AD for the best package you could possibly get. But that also means Gentry has to go, not because of any personal failings or things like that, but if you're going to make the change, everybody's got to go.
Right.
You've got to get a real president of basketball operations. You've got to get a different general manager. You've got to get a different coach. And you've got to decide what is the direction of this team. Because more than anything, it appears that the organization and the team is rudderless.
Well, not just that. They're not committed. There's no commitment to winning. There's commitment to winning on the Saints side. There's commitment to winning with the horse racing stables. There's not a commitment winning with the Pelicans. And they will rue the day that they allowed Anthony Davis to walk out the door. You got lucky. You hit the Powerball when they won that draft lottery. And Dell Demps has been here since he came to New Orleans, and they've done nothing to surround this guy with the players to give him an opportunity to win a championship. And we'll see the second future Hall of Famer walk out of New Orleans with nothing. And that's sad for those that care about basketball in this town. David Grubbs, Les East, thanks so much for joining us tonight on Inside New Orleans Sports. You catch both their stuff at CressidySports.com. It is a go-to site. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE at 10 p.m. Also, you catch us on Friday nights, 9 o'clock on Pelican Sports Television. That is statewide. Catch me on the radio, Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2, and the iHeartRadio app. That's noon to 2 weekdays. You can listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. You can check out all the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports also at ericasher.com as well. Again, special thanks to our guests tonight, David Grubb and Les East. Also to the WLA production staff, Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, also Alex Chacon, Naila Jones, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a great new year. And of course, we'll check you out next week, talking a little bit, hopefully, again, as we get ready to get into the Saints. And also hope the Pelicans turn things around a little bit. My name is Eric Asher. Thanks for watching.